Okay. We're continuing Halacha Beis, Computerized Halacha Beis. Part 3 of how you make Gevinas Yisroel. So to catch up to what we're up to is there's a fundamental machlokes in the Ramah and the Shach as to what it takes to make Gevinas Yisroel. The Ramah says if you watch the cheese making, that's what makes it kosher. And the Shach says you have to do either one of two things. Either the Yid has to own it, or the Yid has to participate in making the cheese. Okay, that's what the Shach says. Those are the two ways of making it. The first time we spoke about it, we just spoke about in general where that comes from, where those sheets should come from. The second time we spoke about what the Ramah holds. And today, we're going to talk about what the Shach, some 3 issues within the Shach's opinion, and then we're going to get to who we pasken like. Well, the pasken with the Shach and the Ramah, which is very, very significant. I mean, has to do with how you make kosher cheese. Very, very nice. Okay. So within the Shach, we have these three things we got to talk about. The first is one of the Shach's methods of making Gevinas Yisroel is if the Yid owns it. If the Yid owns it, then it's Gevinas Yisroel. The Shach himself has 2 ideas. He himself mentions 2 ways that the Yid could own the cheese. The first is, one of them is, I don't think it's the first one, but one of them is, he says, if the Yid rents the cows. Okay? Now, rents the cows means to say is that he's made a deal with the owner to say that I own your cows, the Indian, that the milk is mine, so that when we make cheese, that cheese is going to be mine. Okay, that's one method. And the other thing the Shach says is he makes a deal with the guy. He says the deal is I'm going to buy this many cheeses from you after you're finished. Okay, so they're sitting there making cheese, they're giving 1,000 pounds of cheese, and either he says he's going to buy it all, or he's going to buy part of it, and there's a deal to buy the cheese from the guy.
Can't you buy the milk? Can't you buy the cows?
So the Shach says it as he rents the cows. It's sort of like maybe it's a dumb shot. I'm not sure why he's saying it like that, but he's buying the milk. He's when he calls it renting the cows, it means I'm taking the milk. So that's when.
We want to talk to one first about a case where a guy makes makes cheese out of a Jew's milk. Does the word talk about that?
I don't know. Yes, you know. The Shach is just talking about what's going on in his neighborhood and what people are doing. He just thinks they rent the cows. We're Indian that the cheese should be theirs. It's the same thing as buying the milk. It's just a fancy way of buying the milk.
Sorry, no, it's not either. Because we're not that. What you do is
nowadays.
The milk coming in.
Masking. Now, what the Shach mentioned 2 ideas. Either they rent cows, means that they own the milk, or they make a deal that they're going to buy the cheese when it's over. So the first of those 2, renting the cows, meaning owning the milk. That's simpler. Conceptually, it's easier to understand because when you make the cheese, in order to be kosher, it has to be Gevinas Yisroel, and it is. It is Gevinas Yisroel because the Yid owns the milk already. When they make it, it's already belongs to the Yid. The second case is a little more difficult to understand because the second case was that the Yid made a deal that he will buy the cheese after it's made. He made a deal that I'm going to buy from you this many cheeses from you afterwards. So it's harder to understand conceptually how's a Gevinas Yisroel. The Shach said Gevinas Yisroel is it's kosher when it belongs to a Yid. Well, when this cheese was made, it didn't belong to a Yid. So the Pri Chodesh, when he says it, is Nikru al Shem Yisrael Shenas B'Shviloi. They have the Jew's name on it because it's going to eventually be his. So he says it's going to be Ki'ilu Hagoyim Megavnim B'Chol Shel Yisrael. It's as if they're making with the Jew's milk.
I mean, if it's spoiled in getting it.
So I don't know what the contract is. What happens if it's spoiled? But it's not really the Yid's milk during the cheese making. It's really only going to be the Yid's after the cheese making, which seems to be too late. Okay, and with this other idea that the Shach says, this idea that you could have the deal to buy the cheeses later, it's not just a nice thing that we can ignore that the Shach says. Because if you remember, from the first time we spoke about this teretz is what the Shach uses to explain the Sefer Hagudah. The Sefer Hagudah is what the Ramah brought his right from. The Sefer Hagudah said that the Yidden go to the Goyim and they're going to have cheese from them, and they make it on Shabbos, and it's kosher. Or if the assumption is that it's kosher. So the Ramah says, you see, just watching is good enough. And the Shach said, no, it's not. That's not why. It's really good enough because the Yidden had the deal to buy it. They made up. The Sefer Hagudah said they made up. They're going to buy the cheese from them. So that's why it's kosher. So that means it's to say this part of the.
If the goy is making it on his issues, his property, any way he wants it, as long as everything is kosher, to the Jew standards. The Jew says, "I'm going to own it." That means if he's working on Shabbos, it's working for.
So we spoke about that. Was 2 times where we spoke about that. Is it a hilchos Shabbos? So put that on the side for now. We're talking about just the Kashrus of it. So the Sefer Hagudah was assumed to me that it was kosher.
That affects the Kashrus.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking. Ignore the fact that it's the Hilchos Shabbos of it. We passed that already. So the Shach is saying the reason why that cheese is kosher is because the Yid had a deal to buy it. So it's very important. This idea that you could buy it later is important to the Shach, and he doesn't bring a right that you could do that. I mean, he can say for good, according to him, is saying that, but where's the makor to that? The whole idea that the Yid owning it be good enough just because it's Gevinas Yisroel. Okay, well, where's the Gemara say that if the Yid's gonna own it, that's also good enough? So this needs more understanding. You hear hints here of what Ramosha said, that the cheese doesn't have to be kosher during the time you make it. It only has to be kosher when it's a Giv Yad Yisrael. So maybe over here we're like set up that by the time the Yid gets it, he's gonna own it, so somehow that makes it better. You see here a similarity. But we're missing a proof to this. The first case, the other case of Shach was the simpler case. The case that the Yid bought the milk and then they made cheese out of it. So that's Gevinas Yisroel. They make the cheese from the get-go was a Yid's. Over here, it's not really a Yid's. It's gonna be a Yid's. They have
the Ramah doesn't agree to that? That if milk is the Jews...
We're getting to that, but no, the Ramah has no reason to think like that. No. If the whole riot comes from the Sefer Aguda. He learns the Sefer Aguda differently. That's because the Yid watched it. So where the Shach is getting is that you could own it in the future. It's not so clear. I mean, he's getting it from the Sefer Aguda, but there were two ways to read that. There are more read the Sefer Aguda to be saying that you just have to watch it. That's how we read it. So you're saying, no, he meant it because he's going to own it. Well, who said gonna own it is, what does gonna own it mean anything? Gonna own it is, it's not that the cheese wasn't made as he.
Maybe that's just the pashtus. Maybe Ramah agrees that the Jews' milk. It's Gevinas Yisroel. It's Jews' milk.
Okay, so I was going to get that in a second, but there's no basis for saying that. There's no indications that the Ramah says like that that's Gevinas Yisroel. That reading, the Shach says, it comes from the fact that it's called Gevinas Yisroel means it's a Jew's cheese. There's nothing to do. There's no context. It's just So now there's a third way. I mentioned to you two ways. The Shach himself said either you can own the milk or you can have a deal to buy the cheese. Pistol Tshuva brings that there's a Noid Behuda who talks about making kosher cheese. Now the Noid Behuda holds like the Ramah really. Okay, really holds like the Ramah. But when he's explaining the sheet of the Shach, he says that there's another way you could do it. He says is if the Yid owns the rennet, that'll also make the cheese kosher. Okay, then also, according to the Shach, that would qualify as Gevinas Yisroel if the Yid owns rennet. He explains that what he means is like this. He says, the Yid doesn't have to, when the Shach says the Gevinas Yisroel is kosher because it's the Yid's cheese, it doesn't have to be completely the Yid's cheese. Even the smallest partnership in that cheese is enough to make it his. So the rennet is a tiny bit. I mean, it's a tiny, small amount that goes in, but that's the only other ingredient. So the Yid has even this tiny percentage that's good enough. He brings, that's what Chodesh argues. Chodesh says only B'diavad does a small shukvus hold, and then this is not true. Any shukvus helps, even the smallest amount of ownership is good enough to make it be considered the Yid's cheese.
Can I just extend that? If it has anything to do with the cheese making, does that agree with the actual cheese? Let's say I own the vat.
No. It has to own the cheese. It's Gevinas Yisroel. We're looking for Gevinas Yisroel.
It says I'm a partnership in
the Noid Behuda is saying it doesn't have to be completely the Jews' cheese, even partially the Jews' cheese, but the cheese, it's the cheese that we're talking. Okay, so now.
Do you know offhand where that good is?
I'll get it to you later, because when we spoke about it last time, I had the Marmachim over here. Okay, so the Behuda says, he says, this idea that the Yid can own the rennet, in his mind, that's the standard case that would happen if a guy was making cheese. And he says it as follows. He says, where would the guy get Kavus Nevela from in the first place? Kavus Shchuta from. Where would he get a kosher? And it's not like today that you went to the distributor and you bought, microbial rennet with a hashkach on it. He had to buy Kavus Ksher. He had to buy the stomach from a kosher animal. Well, where did he get that from? So obviously he got that from the Yid. So the Rebbe says that's like the normal case would be is that the Yid brings the rennet when they're making cheese together. They're making kosher cheese. The guy brings the milk, well, because milk's all over the place. But the Kavus Ksher has got to come from the Yid. So the Rebbe knows that's like the normal thing. The normal arrangement would be that the Yid brought that. With Indian, that means is according to Yehuda, we have a different possible explanation for the Sefer Aguda. Again, the Ramah had thought the Aguda was a riot to him, that watching is enough. Because the Aguda says that they made on Shabbos, they made the cheese. So the Shach said, no, it's because the Yid has the deal to buy it. According to the Yehuda, we have a different answer, which is the Yid brought the rennet with him. And then Yehuda said, that's the normal thing that would happen, or else the guy has no way to make kosher cheese. So the deal is, the guy has the milk, the Yid comes along with his rennet that he brings with him to make sure that it's made kosher. Okay, so according to what is it?
Doesn't say that.
No, but the Rebbe says it doesn't have to. He doesn't bring the Sefer Guda. But then Yehuda says that's in his mind. That's like the normal thing is that if you went to Johnny to make cheese for you, the normal thing is that you would bring your own rennet because how else is he going to get it from?
It doesn't say anywhere before like that.
It does.
It's supposed to be other two.
It doesn't say. It does say that the Yeh had deal to buy it. It's true. So that part of it, but it doesn't say that that's the crucial part of it. That's true. But so okay,
it doesn't say anything about
Wait, but back up a second. The Aguda is not talking about kosher cheese. The Aguda is in Hilchos Shabbos. The Aguda is talking about, is it Isser?
The scenario that they're
No. The Aguda is talking about whether this thing is also to do it on Shabbos or not. Whether it's kosher or not. He wasn't talking about it's kosher.
Way, but I'm saying the scenario that they're going to spells out before. She judges with 2 points. Either talk about owning the shigum of the cheese and off don't see it.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, but I'm arguing that, right? That he's not in. The Shach says he's not in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, not Masechet Avodah Zarah. He's in Masechet Shabbos. He's not talking about Kashrus. He's talking about how to make.
That's what it's all.
Okay. Anyhow, so if that's true, if the Rebbe Yehuda can answer that the Yid brought the rennet, then the Chiddush that the Shach said doesn't have to be true. The Shach being mechadish that the Yid's gonna own the cheese that's also good enough. The Rebbe Yehuda doesn't have to agree to that. The Rebbe Yehuda within B'shita Shach wouldn't have to agree to that. He could go with what we think is the pashas that you have to own at the time of the cheese making. The time of the cheese making, you own the milk, of course it's kosher. The Sefer Guda says that the Yidden used to watch them make it on Shabbos, and the Yid didn't own it. Then the answer is because he owned the rennet. So at the time of the cheese making, he also owned it. So it could be according the Rebbe Yehuda doesn't hold the Shach altogether. But according to the way he's saying that owning the rennet is good enough, we may not. It doesn't mean. It could mean is you have a different way to get around what the Shach says, and won't have to say that the Yid could own it even afterwards. That Chiddush that the Shach said, he doesn't make a big deal of that, but that Chiddush that you could own it afterwards, that the Rebbe wouldn't have to.
So saying that according to the Rebbe is saying according to the Shach, you don't have to own the red Shach over there.
I understand that could sound funny. I'm just saying is, but within the Rebbe Yehuda is saying within that mahal, right? Within that mahal, that the way you do it is by owning it. The Shach only had one way to add to that. He only says, so it must be that it's considered only because you can get it later. And he said, that part I have a different way to get around it, which is more logical. It's easier to absorb that a person that we should consider the Yid owns it if he owns it during the cheese making. Let's say he owns it afterwards. It's harder to accept that. If the Shach says it, but the Shach sort of stuck to say that. And the Rebbe is saying, I have a way out. You shouldn't have to say it. Okay, we're going to come back to this maybe in a little bit. Okay, so that was one thing we talked about. How do you own it? Okay, the second thing was. The Shach said, the other way to make Gevinas Yisroel is, if the Yid doesn't own it, but the Yid participates in making the cheese. Okay, so we have the same kind of question that we spoke about last time, which is, what happens if you have a plant where the Yid can't participate? Okay, it's a kind of a plant where there is nobody who puts rennet into the milk. You go into the plant, it's this beautiful, shiny, sparkling, clean plant. You don't see any milk, you don't see any people, you don't see any cows, you don't see anything. It's just big shiny tanks, and everyone sits in the control room, and from the control room, everything gets put in. Okay, everything is computerized to the point that no one's actually pouring rennet in. You say to the Yid, go ahead and pour it in, that'll make you Gevinas Yisroel. So is it good enough that the Yid programs it or pushes buttons on computers? Does that also count to make it to be considered Gevinas Yisroel?
You can pass Yisroel that way. Is that
so? Very good. We'll come to that. Very good.
Well, I'm saying that's what I have.
So very good. So what it is like this. When they asked Rabbi Shach about this, he's like, no problem. Let him program the computer. It's programs the computer, everything's wonderful. It'll be Gevinas Yisroel.
But does that program before each time?
No, program it forever.
I didn't know we were going to have timers. It's like a timer.
Timer.
Until yesterday, probably.
Let me talk. They asked Moshe Halberstam, and he told them.
That's who that is?
Yeah, he's a dying for the Eidah Charedes.
Oh,
and he says, I'm sorry, and he said that it's Batsim holds that it's okay. Batsim the Eidah holds that it's okay. But they want to be a little more cautious, so they say once a day you should restart the computer. Okay? I guess they don't want to get out of hand. The guy who set the computer and 27 years later it's still making Gevinas. So once they
alive anymore.
But Batsim B'shita they held that it's okay. Okay? Rabbi Belsky said no, he didn't buy it. Rabbi Belsky said, no, it's kol chitzov, it's not koichoi, you can't do this kind of stuff. What kind of thing you program computer? Rabbi Belsky says, all that stuff doesn't work. He says, what you have to do is, you have to take the rennet, you should take the rennet and pour it into the rennet tank. Someplace out there's a tank that holds rennet, you should fill up that tank. Okay? Exactly. Oh, very good. So, you're one step ahead of me, Tom. So, I don't get it. The etzem, the etzem don't understand what is.
Good design.
The etzem I didn't, the etzem I did not understand what he said. Because what on earth does it help me to put it into a tank out there someplace else? So then I was thinking that maybe it's like what David's saying, is that the cheese is being made by nobody. It's like just generic, it's flowing off the moon, just cheese. So then as long as the guy doesn't do anything, then that's good enough. Okay?
Mars.
That what? We'll get there. Okay, so we'll get there. So the question is, just if you're going to go with this mahal, what David's trying to say, which is that, well, as long as it's not Gevinas Yisroel, as long as it's neutral, that's good enough, then it doesn't have to just put the rennet in. You have to do other things. When Rabbi Shach talked about this in a whole different context, it was like, so then the Yid has to fill the milk tanks also. Why just say,
well, it's one part of it.
Milk is milk.
Milk is milk, one part of it. All you have to do is one part of it.
And rennet is rennet.
No, you got to do one part.
I know, but I'm just putting rennet into an empty tank. I'm putting rennet into it. There's a bowl here, and I'm pouring rennet into it. And I don't have any milk in it. I'm just pouring rennet into this tank that holds rennet.
No, you have to, the computer has to let the rennet go into the milk.
Yeah. But just put the rennet into the rennet tank.
Right.
And then whatever anybody can program the computer.
Oh, you said
you didn't say
yeah.
Oh, it's a whole new mindset.
Put the rennet into the rennet tank. I was like, hello, what does it make difference? So if you're going to say, they say, as long as no guy can do anything, you do everything, then you have to do everything. Put the milk in, put the rennet, do as much as could be. But what's the point to just put rennet into a rennet tank and have the guy program? So what do you do? Nothing. What do you do anything?
What did he answer you?
Sure, that's what you said.
No,
it was there.
No,
it was there.
I'm not sure. That's my impression. That's what he said.
I don't get this up.
I don't get it. Now, also, now this I heard indirectly. I heard this one indirectly. That Shlomo Miller was making, that he allowed people to run the program. My impression was that he allowed it along the lines of Rabbi Shechter, that you could just program it and it goes forever. He had another thing. I'm not mentioning it now. He had another thing he wanted to do, but that I have a feeling it was more like Rabbi Shechter. I'm not sure 100%. It could be he was like Rabbi Shechter. My impression was that he was like Rabbi Shechter, you could program it. So now, we spoke about 2 times ago, I'm coming back to what you said. We spoke about 2 times ago, what's the reason why? Where did it come from that a Yid making the cheese is good enough? The Yid owning the cheese came from the fact that it said that was from the wording. It's called Gevinas Yisroel. Makes it a Jew's cheese. That's what's kosher. That's Chazal said what's kosher. What makes it kosher? Because they didn't help put in the rennet. Why is that made it kosher? And we said it comes from a Tosefta. That the Tosefta, the Mordechai says it comes from a Tosefta. That the Tosefta compares, the way he reads it, compares Gevinas Akum to Bishul Akum and to Pas Akum. That just like those are made by Yid participating, so too these are made by Yid participating. That's how Chazal structured the takana, that it has to be a Yid participates is what makes it kosher. So what the two of you are remembering is that way back when, this is like, goes back a while, when we learned Computerized, we spoke about this. We spoke about what does it take to make Pas Yisroel, or Bishul Yisroel, what does it take to make that, and does Kosher work, those kind of discussions. We spoke about exactly the same machlokes. Okay, Rabbi Shechter disagreed then. And Rabbi Shechter, I'm going to just say to you in short now, Rabbi Shechter had rayas. Rabbi Belsky's raya comes from the fact there's a Gemara that says that if you there's a river that's being held back by a dam, and you pull out the dam, then you're only chayiv for the first flow of water that comes out that kills somebody. Okay, you're only chayiv for that first flow of water. Water that flows later on that kills somebody, you're not chayiv for. That's what his rayas have to do with that. And Rabbi Shechter had 2 arguments on that. I'm saying just in short. You can go listen to the recording if you want to. In short, one was that over there the reason why only the first class counts as the Yid is because there the energy is already there. The water is waiting to come down. Gravity is waiting for it to drop down. You just have to pull the dam out of the way. As opposed to if you start something from scratch, you turn on a computer, that anything that happens afterwards is considered Kosher. That was one argument. And the other argument is that thing that you need Kosher and Kosher Rishon only applies by certain halachas. If I remember, there were 4 halachas that it applies for. Maybe there were more. Like a bunch of very specific halachas. Everything else just needs to have Kosher Garva. It doesn't have to be Kosher Rishon. And it doesn't have to be like that. It wasn't so sophisticated. Okay, so at the time, I'm sure all of you remember. At the time we spoke about it, we had rayas aside Rabbi Shach's own bias, the fact that we use boilers, we spoke then about how boilers start up. Boilers start up the way Rabbi Shach says. Okay, boilers start up the way Rabbi Shach said. If you turn on a boiler to consider Bishul Yisrael, you're doing what Rabbi Shach said, in effect. Okay, so it's a question. And what Rabbi Yaki said was another side was, well then, maybe we should use timers also. It's a question whether a timer and a computer is the same thing. A timer is a little more removed from me than the computer is. The computer is I sit there, I set the program, and I say, okay, run this program. And every day at 5 o'clock, it's going to do this program. That's a little more connected to me than the timers. So, okay, so it's questionable.
They don't turn it down. They don't turn the computer down.
Right.
I mean, if there's a, power outage, gotta reboot it. Then we'll call me to do it anyway, so it'll be a problem.
So anyhow, so this shiloh about whether you use this computerized, we spoke a little now, but really it was back then in Computerized we spoke about. Okay, last is, we really almost said the whole thing here already, but Yossi mentioned before that the Ramah says that the way to make Gevinas Yisroel is the Yid watches. We have no basis for thinking that the Ramah would hold that you can make Gevinas Yisroel by the Yid participating or the Yid owning it. He says nothing. All of his rayas push the other direction. So, if theoretically, like I could participate without seeing, if there would be such a thing, could there be such a thing? Then okay. So then it would be. We have no reason to think that would be okay. I don't have a right that it's not okay, but I have no reason to think that. Everything he says talks about seeing, and that's sort of an assumption. The question is more the other way. Within the Shach said you have to either own it or you have to participate. He for sure says seeing is not good enough. That he's pretty clear. It's a really long Shach. He's pretty clear that he does not want seeing. The question is, does he also need you to see it? So there's a small vehicle.
Is it a practical case?
Of what?
You're not discussing about a case of participating without seeing.
No. In the Ramah when I think participating without seeing.
No, just on the Shach. You're right now you're asking whether...
No, it's more, okay, the question is more on owning without seeing. If I have milk, the Shach says I own the milk, it's mine. When I don't see anything. It's 50 miles away from me. I don't see anything. So there's a pirush on the side of the Shulchan. Pirush on the side of the Shulchan called Mati Yonison. Pirush called Mati Yonison. At the end of the Mati Yonison on this Shach, there is a way to read him to be saying as if he understood that the Shach holds you have to see it also. There's a way to say that. It's not really, there's no implication like that in the Shach that I see. The Mati says, it's a way to read it like that. You should know the Chazon Ish says not like that. The Chazon Ish says, according to the Shach, he assumes, he ends with Tzarechim, but he assumes that the Shach, according to the Shach, you do not have to see it. There's no reason to see it. And the Shach himself has an indication like that also. The Shach talks about that the Yidden who had goyim in their houses making cheese, it was considered kosher, even though the Yidden weren't seeing anything. He talks about they weren't around. The goyim were making cheese, and that was considered kosher because he owns it. Because he owns it. Now you could read it, you could say it's because it's Yosef Nichnas, you could say that, but it doesn't sound like that. The Shach sounds like he's saying is, I told you that owning it is good enough, and that's why we came in the house making cheese, because owning it is good enough. It's my cheese, it's good enough.
I want to say about Bishul.
We're not talking about Bishul, we're talking about cheese.
It's all the same Xera, right? Yeah. So what does he all by Bishul?
No. If you participate, when you participate, here there's an extra cooler. Owning doesn't help.
Take it back.
Okay, strike it from the thing.
No,
okay.
Please.
Okay. So the Shach implies when he says this thing that they would leave the goyim at home making cheese, and since it was there, so it gives the implication that there was nobody watching. It's not because you're Yotzev Nichlas kind of thing, but I can't say it's 100%. Anyhow, okay. Now, for the next piece we have to talk about is now that we've talked about.
Of course, but it can't be any real Shach that they're not using kosher, right?
That's understood. That's not different than yes. Okay, so now we spoke the first time about what the machlek this is. Well, now we spoke a little about the Ramah last time and the Shach this time, and now we come to we call it the bottom line. Okay, we pass like the Shach or the Ramah. Okay, now before I start this part, I have to just ask everybody a favor. Okay, we're going to talk about some different hashkachas over here. Okay, and some different things that happen, but we're not going to use anybody's names. Okay, so if you think of any, say, oh yeah, that was yeah. So keep it to yourself. Okay, anyway, we'll talk about it afterwards. Okay, so we have a machlokes. We have this big machlokes. There's a make cheese by watching it or by owning or participating. That's this big machlokes. Okay, most of the achronim go like the Rambam. Most of the Achronim say, like the Ramah, that watching is good enough. I forgot to mention when we did the Ramah, that the Rambam and the Pirushim Shnayis sounds like the Ramah. sound like the Ramah that watching is good enough. I forgot to mention, I can't say that he holds like the Ramah, so it sounds a little silly. But anyhow, but most of some of the Achronim bring that Pirushim Shine says that. But we mentioned the Yehuda today, who says like the Ramah. We mentioned when we learned Halacha Aleph, we had mentioned the Dik in some Sofer that he holds like the Ramah. I don't know if you remember that, but when we learned Halacha Aleph, we mentioned such a Dik. The Sha'ar Tzion, many people know the Sha'ar Tzion, says that we followed the Ramah. Ramosha in Hilchos Shabbos, by that din in Hilchos Shabbos about making cheese
on Shabbos.
When he brings the Sefer Good that you're allowed to go and make it on Shabbos. It's in Shin Zion. And Rav Moshe says also that we do like that, and many Achronim say that. There are Achronim who say like
wash and make the cheese.
Is enough. There are Achronim, the Pri Chodesh is a notable one who says like the Shach. But most Achronim say like the Ramah, and one like in between is the Aruch HaShulchan, who says that the din is like the Ramah, but l'chatchila you should try to do it the Shach also. Okay, that's like in between. But most Achronim tend to call it the Ramah. Now, the fact that the Ramah was so assumed that was what the real din is, came up once because there were a whole group of hashgachas, who were together going to allow cheese to be considered kosher without a yid being there. And they were going to do it because the Shach says if the yid owns it, then it's considered Gevinas Yisroel. And Rabbi Shach was like, where are they coming from? It was like such a strange thing. Like, why are they doing like the Shach? The Ramah says you have to watch it. There was going to be nobody watching. So where are they coming from? He was very surprised, and I haven't a clue what the real answer was. I mean, where did they come from? Why would so many I heard him say like the Ramah? It's hard to imagine that someone should go like that. And these people doing it, they may still be doing it.
Well, maybe the Ramah agrees.
That what? That only is good enough. Again, as I said before, we have no. We have no basis to say that. We have no reason to think.
It's a Vade Shach, self-equivalent. We don't have to mark.
All that point say like you got to point like this.
We need a riot.
For the record.
You need a riot. Where's the Shach? And it's self-equivalent.
No, yes, the Ramah says what it takes to make things so. If you watch, it makes things so.
No, he doesn't think this is it.
What do you think? You think it's hidden in Ebenezer? What do you think? This is the symbol. It says, hey, it says it right away. He says if you watch it, what it. Okay, so. Okay, he's Malamed Chus, it's almost Shoshani, he's being Malamed Chus, and all these people who all want to go, and Rabbi Shach had a clue what they were talking about. Okay, so but what's going with that story on the side, besides that story on the side, what was always, there we go, what was always the assumption, always was the common practice in the United States was, that they would mark them for both shitas. They did like the Ramah, if you had to watch it. And at the same time, they required the yid to throw in the rennet. Right. Well, obviously, like everyone's been saying, if you throw in the rennet, you're going to be watching also, so sort of got like a twofer. Okay, you did one, you get the other one. But they were always assuming that we're doing like the Ramah, and we're doing like the Shach. The yid watches it, and the yid throws it in. Now, the yid could watch it.
And the Shach by owning it.
Yeah, they didn't like that. They didn't. Okay, was it really not? There were times that he really owned it. That would be okay. Okay, there are people who really owned it, but to play games and fake own it, they didn't want to go there. Now, there are people now who are rewriting history, okay, who say that the reason why they said the yid has to throw it in is not because of the Shach. It was a trick. They didn't think the mashgichim were going to actually show up to watch the cheese making. So they made a trick. They said to the mashgichim, you have to throw in the rennet, and that way we'll make sure you're going to watch it, because if you have to throw it in, then you're going to be watching it. So it was a trick to get the mashgichim to show up on time. It was a whole thing, it was just a game. It was just a trick to get mashgichim. It really wasn't going to tell the doing it, but that's really... Therefore, really, we were always doing like the Ramah, that you just had to watch it. And this thing about throwing it in, it was just a trick to get mashgichim to do a good job. So we had 4 mashgichim. So if I have a better mashgiach, if I get a better mashgiach,
but if he's there already, what is their problem?
Let me talk. So this is people who want to rewrite history. Really, everybody knows that it was assumed in America for the past 99 years, 50 years, that you have to like the Ramah and like the Shach. If you like the Ramah, says you watch it, and do like the Shach, that you throw it in. Okay, now there was a tiny. One small situation where people were letting cheese be samach on the Ramah, and that was this went on for like a while. But there was a little situation which was if somebody was making cheese 7 days a week, and they didn't want the cheese to be kosher, they wanted the whey to be kosher, and the problem was that on Shabbos the yid couldn't throw in the rennet. So what they would do was on Shabbos they would let the yid watch the cheese making. And that whey would be considered treif, just that they wouldn't have to kasher the kelim. Okay, they were samach on the Ramah to say that they don't kasher the kelim from the way after Shabbos, and they could right after Shabbos could start making way that's kosher again. They wouldn't kasher the kelim. That was like that was going on for a while. That was like okay. That's, what do you say?
How much bittul do you need for Gevinas Yisroel?
Shisha. It was a Ramah in Halachal. Yeah. The Ikadin, the Malkum Hefsek was Samacham Roy, but Mikad the Shisha. So they said, okay, so you don't have to kasher. They all have to kasher. But then what happened was. Everything was running pretty smoothly until how many years ago? One of the hashgachas broke ranks, and they decided they were going to be samach on the Ramah by themselves. Okay, they decided if a yid watches, that's good enough. Why were they saying that? Was it this kind of a situation? If I remember, it was a mozzarella plant, so they had lots of cooked water, and the company wanted their whey to be kosher. So they said it was worth so much that the whey should be kosher that they were willing to have a mashgiach there all the time. The plant was open 24/7, and they were willing to have a mashgiach there all the time. I mean, it's a lot of money. All that was worth it to get their whey to be kosher. But of course, the problem was that on Shabbos, the yid can't throw in the rennet. You can't make cheese on Shabbos. So they said, okay, it's fine. We'll let on Shabbos we'll be samach on the Ramah, and the yid watching it was going to be good enough. That was the first thing. Now, when that happened, the first times, nobody knew about it. Okay? The people who did that didn't tell anybody that that's what they did. They just decided that was good. They did that. But came along another company that wanted to do the same thing, and they approached a different hashgacha. And they hit this hashgacha. The second hashgacha, they said, guys, can we do this? They said, of course not. The yid has to throw in the rennet. They said, really? But the guy down the block, the proverbial down the block, he's doing it, and they're letting him do it, and he's open on Shabbos. You tell me I can't do it on Shabbos? He's doing it. So the second hashgacha said, really? You guys are doing that? And when they found that, yeah, they are. And that was the secret was out of the bag at that point. So now they had two choices. Either they could have said, "That's what you're doing, Shulchan. For all the years, everybody's been doing it like that. Chutzpah, we won't take your part." That's one reaction they could have had. Or the other reaction was, it says, "Can't beat them, join them." So they said, "Okay, fine, good idea. Hey, that's a really good idea. We'll go with that also." Okay, so now they turned to that price company and they said, "Okay, guys, is this okay? Could we be signed off on that?" So they said, as well, they looked at the din, and again, if you were living in a desert island and you just looked at the din, you would probably pass like Rambam and say that a yid watching is good enough. And so that's what they said. Rambam says it's good enough. What's a little question here is that what happened to the fact that for the past how many years everyone's been doing like the Shach also. In America, everyone's been following the Shach. And so you say, no, well maybe we're really doing it, we'll call it a Aruch Shulchan said. You should really do things like the Ramah. If you should try to do like the Shach. But there's a big hesed, so if it's very important, so then you could be samach on Ramah, because that's really the din. Okay, maybe, but all of that is very tainted by the fact that there was a lot of money hanging over the table. So it didn't give a very good feeling for the whole thing. But then they said, you know what? No, we're going to do the Shach also, because what we're going to do is the mashgiach is going to own the rennet. When the rennet comes into the factory, when it comes in, the Mashiach's going to make a kinyan on the rennet. It's going to be his rennet, and therefore it's going to be his. So, and that way we're doing the Shach also, because the Shach says if you own it, and the rennet uses either if you own the rennet, that's also good enough. I told you, rennet is good enough, so you can own the rennet, that's good enough. And they make a Shach because he owns it, and he's watching, and he's doing bullshit. So the problem, the question on that is that in the case of the Nei Yehuda said, the reason why it's Gevinas Yisroel, according to the Shach, is because the Yid is a partner in the cheese. And even though he's a small partner, that's good enough. Okay, in this case, in the Nei Yehuda's case, the Yid's partnership at the time of the cheese making is he owns a small amount, he has just the rennet, and then eventually he owns more, and that's considered his. Over here, the Yid's partnership is ending at the cheese making. They're throwing in the Yid's rennet, and he's not getting anything back. They're not giving him a percentage of all the sales. They're not saying, we use your rennet, here's your percentage. They're using his rennet, he's letting them use his rennet, and then what's happening? That rennet is going into...
reverse Shabbos.
Yeah, the what? They made it. It's his. It is.
Not just the rennet.
For the profits.
What?
Yeah. They're not going to do that.
What? They're giving him. So they say no. We are giving him the profit. He gets a paycheck. He gets come on, give him a paycheck. If that makes you happy, you think that's
anyway.
It's very Shach. To say so I'm a partner because we play the game. Okay, so
no. Can I get that? You have to make it
okay. So the truth was
what is the bottom line on the partnership? Is it that the Yid has to own the cheese, the actual cheese, or does he have to have a benefit from the making of the cheese, of which one is ownership?
That's a very good question.
Because if he's got the kalim,
That's good.
they're kosher.
Okay, wait. So the answer is, he has to be an owner. He doesn't have to be a beneficiary. Beneficiary he is. Well, I'm a beneficiary because I get a paycheck at the end of the month. You know, so I'm a
I'm talking
beneficiary.
about the mashgiach.
Yeah.
He's representing the hashgacha.
Right. You mean?
So
But
I'm
rather-
talking about the company here.
Yeah.
And the
Well, we're saying a yid has to be an owner. A yid has to be a part owner of it. So he has to
So
be an owner.
if he owns the rennet, then he's a part owner. He doesn't give $50 to actually take ownership of the finished product. He's got an ownership. It's
So
sitting on
what-
the shelf. You want, you buy it.
Wait. What I'm saying is he has zero ownership of the finished product. He owned the rennet. He let them use his rennet into the cheese, and when the cheese goes out the door, it doesn't have his name on it. He doesn't get any profits from it.
But
It's gone. It's not
It might
his.
be gone, but he can go in there. It's perfectly good cheese and say, I want to buy that cheese that we made this.
And then if he does that, they're going to send him to the penitentiary. If he wants all of the cheese, they're going to throw him in jail. It's not his cheese. Because it's not his cheese.
There's no contract for
It's
it.
not his. He owned the rennet. He said, you can use my rennet. He doesn't make any cheese. This is all a game. I mean, he owns the rennet in theory. As soon as it goes to the cheese.
If I come to a company and I say, I'm going to watch the making of the cheese. I'm going to put in the rennet. It's my rennet. I'm going to put the rennet in. And then World Cheese is short some cheese. And you go, and listen, we just made this cheese, and I need some cheese. It's kosher. I was there. Let me buy some of the cheese. What's the problem?
No,
You're
but
buying it
you have
now.
it as a new person to buy it. But you're not taking because you were the owner beforehand.
Right.
You're not taking the fact that you used to own the rennet didn't play into your owning some of the cheese. The cheese was nothing. Once in the case of the Yehuda, when you put in the rennet, is because. And in the end, this is going to be my cheese. So my giving the rennet is part of the deal. I give the rennet, you give the milk. Everyone does a different part. At the end of the day, I walk off. It's a deal. I walk off some cheese.
Just off the top of my head, because I've worked in cheese factories. Maybe you want to call it a game or whatever. Why didn't they arrange that when they made the cheese, that the mashgiach will take home
5 pounds of cheese. Okay, you know what? They might have done that, but it's a game. I mean, who are we kidding? The people are making cheese 24 hours a day. The guy walked up with one block of cheese. It's like you know.
And the byproduct,
Okay. Anyhow, so what happened is.
byproduct is for the way too here, right?
Okay, so let me. I'm almost done. So what happened is. Okay, so all of this was going on. All of this all this discussion was going on for whey. But at a certain point, the companies turned around and said, guys, we're paying mashgichim. They're paying peers of mashgichim. I mean, they need people up here to come 12 hours. The guys each take 12-hour shifts. After 2 weeks, they plot. They need another shift. So they have 2 sets of people who are each being paid full salaries to come there. Okay, out in the middle of no place. This is not going on in Borough Park. I mean, this is going out in the middle of no place. Okay, so 2 sets of people are being paid good salaries. At a certain point, the people said, you know what? They said, this makes no sense. Why are we only making the whey kosher? It was kedai. I mean, on paper, it was worth it to make the whey kosher. They got more money for it. They said, why not make the cheese kosher also? And of course, the hashgacha had no answer to that question. Yeah, kosher is kosher. You know, if it's kosher, it's kosher. So, with Indian, that this story, as it played itself out, means that right now you could go to the supermarket and buy that cheese that was only made according to the Ramah. It used to be.
I hear a shadow because I have a shadow understood something else as well.
Yeah.
You say it's kosher. I mean, the companies are certifying this cheese as kosher. They're certifying this cheese as kosher, Gevinas Yisroel.
Well, it's the same thing. Kosher is kosher. I mean, it has a symbol on it. It has a kosher symbol on it.
Yeah.
And the kosher cheese means Yisroel.
You can buy 2 types of cheese.
No. No, this is a reputable hashgacha.
Right.
No, this is a reputable hashgacha. If you saw it in the store, you would buy it. I'm saying when you walk into it, it has a nice reputable hashgacha.
Yeah.
And when that hashgacha means, kosher means Gevinas Yisroel. But they're doing it according to the Ramah. So again, so where we ended up with, we started was, we started off this many years ago that we did like the Ramah and like the Shach. As we went through the whole story to the point that we got to this point, and now there are people who actually, but you can't not just even get whey mixed into your cookies that are made according to the Ramah, but you can actually buy the cheese itself made according to the Ramah. So again, if we were sitting on a desert island and we just had to think about the pure din, is it like the Ramah or the Shach? It's very justifiable that we should pass like the Ramah. But the fact that it came about through the unfortunate way that it did was not a proud day. It didn't make us feel good that we work in Kashrus.
What's our policy?